Welcome back, everybody, to our Mastering Our Relationships Sacred Self-Healing Workshop. A heartfelt welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for turning in questions if you're watching the recording. And I hope that you can find your question here. Keep bringing them on. We have one more part of this 5-part series, which is part of the greater series, Adjusting to Change. So today we want to talk about toxicity in relationships. What are these typical techniques that we are encountering, and how can we identify this better? How can we discern better whether, there's something that is maybe coming in from our partner that we should have better boundaries with, or whether there's something wrong with the way we're seeing things or with the way we're responding to. Most of us are somewhat at a loss when it comes to identifying toxic patterns, and even a greater loss when it comes to what to do about it. So today I want to go into looking at it together and then maybe discussing how you think this could best be mitigated, prevented, or changed. Yeah, so toxicity is not something that occurs in extremes. Toxicity is a very, I want to say, common pattern in relationships. Yeah, it happens in many different ways. It can happen through the change of the conditions. It can happen through unmet needs, unmet wants, unexpressed emotions. But the most common form, I guess, is the lack of actually communicating what it is that is bothering us, what it is that we would like to address as a couple. It's this sort of helplessness and powerlessness to a degree when we see our partner doing things that we disagree with or that are hurting us, and not really knowing what to do with this. So there's a little bit of psychology needed to understand this better. We looked at attachment, we look at our own ways of loving and bonding, and we looked at communicating, we looked at the energetic aspects between partners last time. And there is more and more clarity now about, how this is all sort of like a ping pong game between two people. But, the reason why we all have these issues with relationships is not just because of our partners or, our failed marriages or failed, hopes and dreams, but also because a lot of these patterns that we can identify in relationships, they also occur in other areas of life. They can occur at work, they can occur with our friends, they can occur with our kids even. Yeah, so when we talked about codependency and fantasy bond, there are a lot of elements of that play out in our families, in our family systems, where these what we experience as deficits, yeah, like this expressing and communicating of our needs can turn on sort of dynamics, or can create patterns in entire family systems. Yeah, which is also why, for example, therapists look at your family system, because what you perceived as normal, yeah, we talked about this especially in the first episode here of Mastering Our Relationships, is somewhat more acceptable for you than compared to something that you're not used to. So there will be elements of your relationships that you may have blind spots for, simply because of the way you were raised, or what the nature of your family system was, and your nuclear family when you grew up. And this is something that we want to dive deeper into today, because if we are used to a certain level of toxicity in our own family system growing up as children into adulthood, we are much more likely to be blind toward things that come up in our relationships, because we either believe it has to be that way, or it's always been that way, or yeah, maybe it just simply a lack of role models, yeah, of other types of relationships that we've never actually even knew they existed. Yeah, and many other factors can play into our ability to detect toxicity, and then of course also into our skill set, like our skill set that allows us and to address these and maybe prevent something like divorce, or prevent something like, bad breakups or toxic patterns in our life. Yeah. So are you ready to look at these things that are sometimes hard to see, or sometimes also hard to admit to ourselves? So there's an element, obviously, of our own perception in all of that. You ready? I want to start out the workshop here today with addressing one of your guys's uh, audience questions that has to do with a topic that I didn't even have on my radar for this series, but I think in today's times it's quite important to address this, and this has to do with online dating. Here's a question in regards to online dating, meeting people online. How healthy are these setups now where people meet online and the communication can stay in texting only, yeah, for over a week? Like if you like someone but they want to just keep texting, is it innately healthy? I have noticed that there to be a complex fee. In other words, you probably mean that there's stuff in there that may not be good. So let's go into this a little bit. What is the general nature of how we date? Okay, so we have these circumstances, these places or groups or friends or occasions at which we gather with other people. So social situations where we can meet people, and in social situations, depending on what that situation is, yeah, we are experiencing the other person in a certain setting. We're experiencing them in ways, yeah, like just think very simply, you meet someone at, let's say, a wedding party, or you meet someone at a cozy dinner with friends, or you meet someone in a bar, or you meet someone randomly walking a dog or in a coffee shop. All these are different circumstances that can determine, how your relationship later on develops in quite a big way. Now, when it comes to online dating, yeah, and there's different forms of online dating. For example, actually, dating services that help you maybe match yourself up with other people who have submitted their profile. So there's computer algorithms and so forth that maybe match up your expectations, your interests, your, sort of what kind of person, maybe socioeconomical groups, education level, and things like that. And then, after the initial matchup, there is a certain procedure, where you go on a first date, to get to know the person in person. And there's obviously a lot that can be said about this, whether it's good or bad. I don't want to really go there. When it is the classic online dating where you meet someone online and then you move it to the next stages, yeah, that allow you to slowly form, trust and see how people react in different situations. I don't think there's anything bad about that in general. I've known some couples that are very happy that met online. So how you actually get to know a person, uh, that actually, doesn't matter at the end of the day. But the stages of your relationship and how fast they go there, and the need for, and this is part of this question here, the need for, well, experiencing one another in different circumstances, in different situations. I think that's universal. Yeah. So there's something cool about meeting people online, and with of the rise of online communities and so forth, we can see that there is a big demand, that there's a big need for us to connect more with other people, and maybe also in a more selective way, like not just anybody, yeah, not just a random sort of person that you meet at a coffee shop or in a bar, but someone who maybe shares your interests and has similarities with you. But then there is a natural progression that needs to occur, and that is that you actually have to see one another in person, and there can be several sort of stages that lead up to getting there. So online dating services fulfill that function for us, that they like sort of arrange things, and that they allow you sort of a platform to keep it safe for everybody. Yeah, so it's not like anonymous. You have to they have to have a background check with some of them, and things like that. So there's certain functions that these dating services provide. But what if you meet someone randomly at Facebook, or at some kind of um, other random social media um, platforms? I would love to hear your guys' opinion about this. What is different when you meet someone online, and what is the same? What should stay the same regardless of where you met a person? Who has some thoughts, or maybe even some experience with that, meeting people online? It's not exactly the question yet. We're just discussing this. We're getting into the thought aspect, or the conceptual aspect of that. There's advantages and disadvantages, right? Anybody, any experience with meeting people online, and perhaps, feeling interested in that person? What is the same and what is different? And what does it require us to do?
Jona, this is Janet.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. Thank you. I just have a couple things to say. The first thing is, well, you were talking about this. Um, it's so pertinent because if we get into a bad relationship, it all kind of started right at the beginning. Like, what is this dating? How do you meet people? How is it that you're attracting people from the very start?
Mm-hmm.
And this, I've had some, I've had my share of experience with this, and I feel that what might be the same is ourselves. So when you're meeting people, whether it's online or it's out in a bar, the one thing we have to rely on is ourselves, and not to lose ourselves in
And that would count for any relationship, and really any occasion, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's what we all, that's the only thing we can rely on, really, isn't it? When
yeah.
it comes to engaging with other people, not just in a romantic sense, but in general. We have to know
I
ourselves
mean,
really well.
online,
Mhm.
you're able to, have a nice chat, and that's what's really great about that is that, especially if you're feeling vulnerable or are energetically more vulnerable, then
Mhm.
it can be that kind of safe boundary. And these days, it seems normal, where it didn't
Mhm.
before. We didn't have it, and
So
in
that would
person,
be a pro, that it allows a person, or allows us to getting to know one another in, yeah, with a certain level of detachment. So we're not in the same physical space, right? We can talk. You and I can do this right now. We're connecting online, right? We can talk, we can see each other, but it still gives us a little bit of a way out, right? It gives us a little bit of a sort of boundary.
Yeah, and then but then that boundary also has its little, it's like we're walking that little fine line, because of course I would prefer to be sitting with you, Jona, rather than sitting on the computer. I've had it up to here with computer people, but yeah, because then the other side, it starts to flip and they start to lose some of it, and it seems like it's really easy for people to then move into their programming and not really face the warmth of being with another person. So I
Well,
think those.
let's go back to yourself. I mean, you nailed it in the beginning when you said it's all about us, and it's all about being able to rely on ourselves, which means, knowing really well what our needs and wants are, knowing really well what our boundaries are, what our no-goes are, yeah, and also knowing what our hopes and dreams are, yeah, so that we can even formulate something like expectations, or that we can even have the clarity within ourselves what it actually is that we want from a relationship, yeah, with a particular person. I don't think
You
it
know, but
matters where we meet them, you know.
this detachment is, especially with what we're talking about today, um, it can online make it easier to quickly catch some of these really weird things that are just going to get worse later on down the line. Like there's a little bit more space to say, like, this isn't right, this doesn't feel
Mhm.
right, and not go maybe so far in as one might in
Yes. So
person.
it allows to both partners or both people that are meeting online a little more leeway, a little more space. But that can also be a con, because it can sometimes allow too much space. Yeah. If you think about those things that you just mentioned, that aren't right from the beginning, some things you cannot feel when it's what you call computer people, when it's just online. Yeah, there are some things that can only be felt in the presence of a person. I think we all agree about this, and we also already know what that is. Okay, so some things can never be experienced online, because at the end of the day, it's not really about, unless it is, yeah, if it's for you to have an online friend, yeah, someone that you can call, text, or Zoom with from time to time, then it's okay. But if you want more, if you want, let's say, a classic relationship that goes beyond, just, having a chat from time to time, which some people like having that. It doesn't even have to be romantically. It could be, talking about certain topics or whatever, having discussions pretty much like we do here. Yeah. Then this medium is okay. If it's about actually, exchanging things, wanting to experience things together, the only way to experience things together is to experience them together. Yeah, so there is a limitation, obviously, as to how far a relationship that takes place online can go. And that limitation is pretty, well, common sense, because there's no touch involved, there's no actual, sensuality involved, not even talking about sexuality, but sensuality, like feeling, smelling, the other person, like having all your senses involved in that it's not there. So it's deprived of the most fundamental, probably the most important way for us to connect with people. Yeah. So without judging it, I think it's fair to say that it can be useful to meet people online. Yeah. But then it has to go farther at some point if our expectation or our desire outgrows, what you can do online. And that has to happen in more or less the same order as it has to happen between humans, no matter what kind of relationship we have with another. Yeah, like whether we can trust a person, for example, that's something that has to build. There is no shortcut to trusting or not trusting people. The only way to find out if you can trust a person is to go through several different situations with them and, look at the track record, or test if you can trust a person. Yeah, this takes time. This takes pace. And this is part of what we need to know about ourselves is what is our pace? What do I need to feel I can trust someone? What do I need to feel safe enough to even emotionally engage with someone? This all depends on us. Okay. And the only advantage that I see here with online dating is that it gives, both in sort of an equal way, yeah, a way to control this a little better, but only to a certain point. Yeah, there are certain things that you cannot judge. You cannot tell if you can trust someone or not if you've never seen them. You cannot tell if how or if this person reacts in certain situations unless you actually experience them going through certain situations. So while online dating can be a cool tool, and our societies are changing there a lot right now. Yeah, so it's not just online dating, it's actually also communicating through texting. Yeah, emailing, I guess, is not really that high up on the list, but texting is a very good example with our partners, or phoning or FaceTiming or anything like that. Yeah, while these are cool tools, they also have limits and they also have dangers. So let's talk about the limitations. One limitation we already worked out. It's very difficult to know if you can trust someone if you cannot really connect with them and experience situations with them. Now, especially different situations in different settings, because that is ultimately what forms trust in us. Yeah, you see how this person reacts to other people, how they respond to unforeseen elements that are occurring at a given time. You see how people, I don't know, anything from how they chew to how they smell to, what kind of sort of aura they're having. Yeah, these are all things that you need to see a person for. Yeah, and obviously, if you then choose to go further into like a physical relationship, a physical connection, then obviously it becomes even more important that there is, the actual physical touch. Yeah. So in general, I think it's safe to say that it is not possible to have a relationship with someone without physical touch, without physical presence. There can be an online relationship with someone, but not a relationship that you would compare with, like, say, a partnership that we have, because that includes the day-to-day, yeah, experiencing things together. So some of that, like the limitations with online dating or online connecting is that it can only go so far. And here's where you or we as individuals need to know what we want. There's obviously people who only want that, and for them it's okay. Yeah, but if you were someone, like you just said, you would much rather prefer to sit next to me or to meet me in person. Yeah, and then that needs to be expressed, because that for you, I mean, Janet, in your case, you and I go way back then, okay, and we actually have met in person many times. So there's a certain level of trust between you and I through the track record that we have with another. Yeah, and you've seen me in many different situations. You've seen my kids, you've seen my relationship with Jeff, right? There's something that you can fall back to, that helps you to sort of reconnect with me, even if we don't speak for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, right? Because it is, tangible. There's substance to it. So the limitations of communicating online and dating online is obviously that it misses out on, the most important part. And I would call this the actual execution of the relationship, yeah, where it's been executed, where you're actually doing it. Okay, you can have emotional exchange, you can have intellectual exchange, you can even have spiritual exchange, and you can even have energetic exchange with technology being between you, yeah. But there is the final step, so to speak, okay, that runs through your whole entire system, yeah, which comes through our five senses, okay, that is that you're missing out on. And that, in my experience, which is quite extensive in extensive in online dating and what it can lead to and so forth, is that without that, it's impossible to know if you can trust someone or not. And it's really a test also, because if someone is really starting to connect with you, and you feel like you're really connecting well on all levels, but is not actually willing to move to the physical level, to like the actual being there in physical, in the physical, that's usually a red flag, because it is a normal human desire to do so. And this is something that we just need to recognize as a natural boundary. Okay, there's certain stages of relationship we just can't enter into without the physical presence of someone. So I wouldn't come to a general statement here that it's innately unhealthy to meet people online or through, with the help of technology. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's better either. Yeah, I think it's a tool, just like many other tools, but it cannot replace all the different stages that we have to go through, and all the different processes that need to happen within ourselves, that allow us to trust in a person, that allow us to build a perspective on like where we want this to go and how realistic is that. So obviously, if it's not in person, then there are a lot of gaps, and the danger with those gaps is that, because this is actually quite a frequent problem, is that our ego then starts to fill in those gaps. It's similar to the fantasy bonds, but for a different reason. Okay, so in a fantasy bond, we hang on to the fantasy, to the ideal of the relationship, or what could be. Okay, but that's an existing relationship. So it's an ideal that forms in our head about how great this relationship could be. And then we become sort of blind over time, not realizing how it's actually not working that well in certain areas. But because we're kind of like remembering how great it was, or how great it could be. So anyone who's ever gone through a divorce, for example, not everyone, but most of us, go through some kind of grieving period with a divorce, even if we were the ones who wanted to get divorced, because there is so much that we've put into this, so much that our ego invested into the marriage or the relationship, that the grieving part, yeah, where our ego basically has to surrender, what usually creates the heartbreak, yeah, is that this is now no longer possible. So a fantasy bond is someone who stays in that state for too long and just hangs on to the idea or the ideal or the fantasy of what could be. Yeah. Here with the online dating, or not wanting to go into this physical stage of relationship, sort of verifying the relationship and executing the relationship. There is a big con with online stuff, because it can also be used to hide behind. It can be used to manipulate people you know, and making promises and making sort of all sorts, or creating all sorts of fantasies and ideals, yeah, but without ever showing up, without ever really showing you that they are willing to do it. So relationship is all about showing up. Yes, and it is common sense, but it is something of a temptation here, because our ego's tendency to fill in the gaps is more likely to be, um, let's say, triggered, yeah, if this physical checkup isn't there. And again, I've already mentioned it, but pay attention to this. So if someone is not willing to show up in 3D, yeah, in the physical, I don't care how cool they are and how great the spiritual connection is and whatnot, and twin soul and soulmate and all that. Really, that is, you know, it's a no-go. Okay, so if you want to invest even just a shred of your energy into a relationship with someone, there needs to be at least a willingness. Now, there are sometimes situations, such as long-term situations, I've been in that place myself, where you can't get together right away, where there's some outer conditions that make it harder, or, you know, it needs to be planned for a longer time. Those are all good opportunities to get to know a person, like how they deal with those adversities. And it's not necessarily a no-go, but it is something that obviously needs to be observed carefully. Yeah, how willing is that person? And, you know, sometimes there's, and this counts for any kind of relationship, there really is, you know, sort of a, I guess, a sort of a fate aspect to it, that sometimes you can't come together and sometimes it is not possible. And yes, and sometimes that feels tragic in a way, you know, because of what could have been. But the could have been is just an ego construct. Okay, it's not real. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what it is, or how what the circumstances are that we meet one another in, and how it all comes about. At the end of the day, it's all, relationship is all about showing up. It's all about, you know, bringing in the willingness, you know, showing the respect, showing the skill, you know, to express things, and, you know, to really execute it. Okay, and it's not enough to just understand this theoretically and to, you know, promise or to assure the other person that you may be willing to do this at some point. You have to bring it on. Okay, and if that doesn't occur, I would strongly recommend that you either take a step back, or that you pay attention to your own ego's tendency to fill in the gaps for you and to create a fantasy. Yeah, because there is a connection here between fantasy bonds and online or long-term, long distance relationships, and that is that the fantasy then takes over. It then replaces reality, and that is always dangerous, no matter how you met. Yeah, even if you met, say, in the physical and you had a great experience, and then you want it to become, I'd say, a real relationship, yeah, then, you know, certain action steps have to be taken for it to become real. Yeah. There's another question from the audience, and I want to answer that as well, but I want to wait till the end of our workshop here, because there are some aspects about that. Whoops. Here I can already give you the question, and that is, how do our relationships reflect ourselves? Yeah, what do our relations? We talked about this in part one. How does the nature of our relationships reflect something back to me? How is it showing in me a mirror? So this is a reflection question, and it's we could do a whole entire workshop about this. The reason why I want to wait with addressing this is because first need to, well, more or less educate ourselves a little more about, the different kinds of relationship and when it all goes wrong. Because when a relationship goes wrong, which is basically the same as saying toxic, yeah, when a relationship is toxic, that means that it's no longer healthy. Yeah, it doesn't mean that it wasn't healthy to begin with, but it means that at this point, it's actually better probably for me to end the relationship than to stay in the relationship. That's what toxic means. Yeah, it's like poison. When you eat a poisonous flower every day, or fruit every day over on a long enough timeline, it's going to kill you. Yeah. So when something is toxic, it means that it's not good for us. Okay. It might be toxic for both. Often it is. Typically it is toxic for both, but there is something in our psyche that makes us stay together regardless, which is why the term toxic relationships is such a common term. Yeah. How many of you have at least experienced or observed a certain form of toxic relationships, like be it friends or parents or maybe your own kids or yourself? Who of you is familiar with, relationships when you look at them, regardless of whether you were in them or not, they would be better off not being together. That would, that it's more like not good somehow. And obviously it's difficult to judge the people's relationships. We shouldn't do that. But sometimes it's pretty obvious to everybody, except for the people involved. You ever had that? Do you know a relationship like that? It's like everybody can see it, but not the people in it. Does anybody want to share? Maybe you have been in a toxic relationship yourself and have not noticed it. Or maybe you have been in a toxic relationship, knew that it was kind of toxic, but still felt kind of caught in there or didn't know how to get out. Does anybody want to share? And we don't have to go into details. I just want to hear sort of overall, so the stages that you went through in, recognizing maybe that it is toxic, or maybe how long it took you to figure this out, that you're better off ending the relationship. Does anybody want to share? I'm going to break the ice here a little bit. I think it's important that we look at that. I, for myself, have been involved in many toxic relationships. In fact, as I mentioned in the beginning of this workshop series, the first 20 years of my relationship career were very toxic in ways that I could not see at the time. I can see it today. And there were so many factors to it. When I was very young, it was mostly in my mate selection. It was also just a form of naivete and innocence, not really knowing, what relationship is and how it's supposed to go. I grew up with a single mom. I never really experienced a relationship, grown up relationships around me. Other people's, like my friends' parents' relationships, were kind of mystery to me. Yeah. So I had to kind of find out the hard way what works for me or not, because I didn't really have an ideal. And so one of the things that happened that happened to me frequently was that I was finding myself in relationships where I was trying to fit in, where I was trying to be good enough for my partner, where I didn't really have any kind of reflection on what it is that I want or that I need. In fact, like so many of my clients, it didn't even dawn on me until I was like in my mid 30s or, early 40s, that yeah, I could have needs too. I could have wants too. It didn't even dawn on me. The relationships I had, they were so toxic that they never even left me with a moment, I want to say, to even think about what I need and what I want. Yeah, they were more or less all about the partner's needs and me somehow deep down. And this is also then how I, found out that it's got to be something about me here. It was all about me trying to fit into how my partner wanted me. And this is it really, really, it's very common. It's a really, really deep problem because if all my energy goes into trying to meet my partner's needs or wants, or yeah, and this is why I'm classifying my relationships as toxic, or their fantasies, how they wanted me and how they wanted the relationship to be. Okay, then guys, we're in trouble. Yeah, we're automatically in trouble. It automatically steers our relationship into toxicity. Why is that? Why do you think that is? That if we, for whatever reason, never ask ourselves or never reflect back to our partner what our needs are, what our wants are, and whether they're met or not. Why am I saying that this is already toxic right there? What do you think? Think of it as like sort of timeline or progression. Where is that going to steer the relationship toward? Is it sustainable? Is it really just a matter of how well you perform? Can that lead
I don't want
to,
it to sound like I'm not responding, but I'm just here to learn and just bring it all in. I have no wisdom to share.
no, this is self-reflection, Linda. This is just about us. I'm asking a question. Why would I say that? What do you think? Why would I say that if I never ask myself about my own needs and wants and reflect back whether they're even met in a relationship, why am I saying that this is already toxic right there?
Because you set it out of balance.
Yes, and when it's out of balance, then what happens? Can it survive? Is
It's
it sustainable?
destined to the junkyard.
Yes, thank you. Maybe my questions are too simple. Maybe you're not understanding my questions, but yes, it's important to realize that we're already steering the relationship into a dead end right there. Last time I asked you, the last question that we discussed here was, whose responsibility is it? Are we responsible for a partner? And you all said no. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, of course not. But that only works if both partners are willing to be self-responsible. Yeah. So self-responsibility would be to say, hey, I have a need here. Yeah. And, whatever. It could be anything. It could be time for yourself, or it could be, something that has to do with your own like physical needs, or time with friends, or it could be money, it could be education, spirituality, or whatever. I have a need here, and I'm not seeing that, uh, that I'm getting this. Okay. And I'm not making you responsible for it. So I'm not necessarily asking you to meet all my needs, but I need you to know that that is something that I need to feel balanced, that I need to feel happy. And if I cannot feel happy, well, then I need to find ways, okay, to make, it's my job, you know, to make myself or to bring myself into that place that I can be happier or more balanced. And for that, I might need more space or more time or more money or, you know, whatever the resources are. Or maybe I just need more attention from you, or maybe I need more touch, or maybe I need more inspiration. Maybe I need some more thrill. Yeah, maybe I need some more play. But whatever it is, sometimes it's hard to define that sometimes, you know, especially if we haven't really had the time to think about our own needs. Okay, it's very difficult to express that. But it is our responsibility to bring this up. Yeah. Now, if it is a mutual relationship and if both partners have a good understanding about the importance of our needs being met, okay, they may facilitate that. They may offer to help you with this. They may, you know, come up with ideas. Yeah, they may take you out on new kind of locations. You know, something surprising, something thrilling, or you know, suggest to maybe do like a, a play night or play game night, or you know, go on a vacation, or you know, so in a good relationship, but there's a good energy exchange, that kind of communication, yeah, hey, I need more of this or I need more of that to feel more balanced or healthier within myself, is being taken extremely seriously, because the other recognizes that if one of us goes out of balance, the whole thing goes out of balance. Yeah. So it is the individual's responsibility, but there is also, you know, the necessity to communicate that correctly, to reflect and to learn how to work with this, because you know sometimes it can be hurtful, you know, when your partner says to you, you know, I'm not getting enough spiritual stimulation, or you know, the food you cook is not good for me, or I don't know. I mean, there's so many examples, right, that can happen in a relationship that lead to us not really feeling our needs met. And sometimes it can be hurtful for the other, and sometimes we're not saying anything because we don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Sometimes we're not saying anything because we're afraid the other person is angry, gets angry, or begins to punish it for it, or uses it against us because it feels like a vulnerability. Anybody ever felt that way? That the reason why you don't want to say anything is because you either don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, or because you're really afraid that they may leave you if you say something. Yeah, guys, that's real.
That one can be very unconscious too. Like it can go,
Yes.
it's like the
Yeah.
negative self voice that it's kind of running it, and then it's, unless you pay attention, the feeling can come on and kind of shut down your throat chakra, and you're not
Yeah.
able to speak, and it just goes, and you don't value it enough. It can
I mean, if you
exact.
have physical symptoms with it, right, that's not even unconscious. That's conscious, but you don't know how to get over it. You know,
Yeah.
if your throat starts like, and you don't dare to say anything, or you start freezing, that's not unconscious. That's pretty obvious, because your entire body locks up. Yeah, so that means something. Yeah, it means you have a strong reaction within yourself. Yeah, that's not unconscious. Unconscious is when you really, really don't even think about it. It doesn't even occur to you, you know, that you could have a need.
Yeah, I had that very recently, and it wasn't a major thing. It was enough just for me to go, oh, I'm feeling not so excited. I'm feeling a little bit more tired. I'm feeling a little bit more like you know, a little bit on that edge. I would have to just say on the edge of fear to speak to this person. And I could see where it was kind of like shifting my energy to make me into a slightly different person. Like I could almost sense that if I allowed it, I would be like, okay, next time I talk to this person, it's going to be this way, and this way, instead of just staying centered and realizing that that feeling is odd and it could be negative and it would be a warning. It could have swept me one way unless I hadn't noticed it.
It could be a warning, but sometimes, and that's, you know, the other side of it, sometimes, especially sort of like the beginning stages of dating, they can really bring out the best in us too. Sometimes we experience ourselves shifting, yeah, into like a happier or more open or, you know, well, I guess also more loved version of ourselves. Yeah, and we show up in a much more what we would call a higher expression. We show up in a better, we can experience ourselves in a cool way. Yeah, so that's the reason why so many people get stuck in these beginning stages of relationships, because it can do both. It can motivate us to become better, yeah, and thus also give us a positive feedback about ourselves, yeah, plus obviously the positive feedback that comes in from the other. But it can also bribe us in a way. It can also push us into a corner. It can also make us, you know, become, let's say, less truthful. Yeah, because we have an interest now. Yeah, say a love interest. Yeah, that word is actually pretty fitting. And like an agenda. Okay, we want the other to like us. We want the other to love us. And, you know, and this all happens within split seconds, right? Fractions of seconds. And we say something, do something, we watch the response, and then, you know, depending on what the response is, we change our behavior. Yeah, so these kind of things, they happen to all of us because it's a normal part of human interaction. We call this projection. Yeah, so that part where we want to show ourselves in our best light, where we want to show ourselves in this idealized version of ourselves, yeah, can go either way. It can create a fake personality. Yeah, that is the one that is quite common actually, that we are, you know, we're so lenient and we are so open and we are so like, I don't know, funny and all this and this and that at the beginning of a relationship. And then, you know, once we go through several stages with that same person, we're beginning to feel frustrated. We're beginning to complain. We're beginning to nag on things. We're beginning to, you know, maybe form resentments. And we're no longer the funny, open person. Now, we didn't necessarily pretend to be that way, but we failed to recognize the stages in which we gave up something here, you know, like, why can I not be the same person that I was when at the beginning of our relationship when we started dating? Because there's a positive feedback that we get from, you know, seeing ourselves in sort of a better light than we are seeing ourselves through the eyes of the other. Can you guys follow me here? So there's something that happens that when like someone shows interest for us, yeah, where they're now, their ego mind is starting to create an idealized version of us. Okay, and they project this onto us, and then we start liking that idealized version of ourselves, right? And maybe that idealized version of ourselves, you know, doesn't have any needs, yeah, is selfless and just gives up everything, you know. And then we're trying to match up, we're trying to catch up with that fantasy or with that projection that the other has of us. So at first it feels like an uplift because we were seeing ourselves prettier than we are, if you will. Yeah. And then it becomes a curse because now we have to like catch up with it constantly. We have to perform. Yeah. Do you guys see what I'm showing you right now? Is the problem with what we present, what we communicate, what we project, and the inner conflict and cognitive dissonances that we can have within ourselves, yeah, about what it actually is that we are. And sometimes it's not that we project something, sometimes it is that the other person projects something onto us, how they want us to be, or, how they see us at first. And then they, begin to see a little bit more of our real self. And then they refuse to accept that. And they sort of virtue signal you into this, like, hey, you used to be so open, or you used to be so funny. What happened to you? Yeah. So these are like sort of bits and pieces here that I'm throwing in to prepare you for these most typical manipulation, emotional manipulation, and mind control tactics that some people use, yeah, to, get you to, not ask yourself what you need, or to make you forget to complain, or make you question yourself at all times instead of questioning them or the relationship. Yeah, so there are some very complex dynamics here, guys. There's a reason why I have a 14-week course called Love and Integrity, explaining all this in detail, because it is much more complex than we think it is. Yeah, so let's look at these manipulation tactics and why it is often our own ego. Yeah, it is our own ego and that tendency to fill in gaps with projections that can lead to, these toxic patterns in our relationships. Yes, I'm not saying that it's necessarily always planned, or that it's always strategic, or, not all people are narcissists. Yeah, but we all do have narcissism in us, and that is basically the fulfillment of our own needs first. Yeah, and so when we talk about narcissism here, in conjunction with toxic relationships, I want you to understand that we're not talking about the psychological definition of narcissistic personality disorder, but we're talking about the degree as to which somebody shows up in a narcissistic way, meaning, their own needs, their own wants, their own fantasies, yeah, their own projections first, yeah, which in and of itself, just so that you can follow me here, is a form of delusion. Okay, so they want you to be in a certain way, let's say, and again here, it's not always for, with a predatory or exploitative agenda behind it. Sometimes, and this is one of the big ahas that I had, they simply don't know. And why do they not know that there are some needs that you have, or wants that you didn't get met, and that brought you out of balance, and it became unhealthy for you, basically made the relationship toxic and unbearable, why you had to leave? Because you never said anything, because you never communicated it. Did this ever dawn on any one of you that maybe the one or the other relationship you had in the past, and this could have also been friendships or job relationships, that you ended the relationship because you could clearly identify at some point, that your needs aren't met, and that it's all about them, and not about you. But upon more detailed observation, you found out that, I never actually told them what I wanted. I never actually outed myself as to like what it is that I need or that I want from them. Yes, Linda is commenting here. Well, they were supposed to read my mind. Yeah, well, I know it's you mean this in a funny way, but that's literally what many of us think. How come they didn't know this? If they loved me, they would know, right? No, guys. And since this is a sacred self-healing workshop here, I can assure you that your energetic sensitivity and perhaps even your tendency to be empathic is only something that you share with maybe 10, 15% of the population. Yeah, so 9 out of 10 people cannot even feel those things unless you spell it out. Yeah, maybe 1.5 people can. Yeah, but maybe don't trust their own perception in that way that, you know, they want to rely on your words. They want to believe you. They want to like take your words, you know, and use them as a sort of navigation system. And if they ask you, yeah, are you sure it's okay for you to do this for me? And you say, oh yeah, no problem. Anybody ever done that? Even though you didn't really want to do it. So what went wrong here? Was it wrong that they asked you if you could do something for them? Was it wrong that you did it even though you didn't want to do it? Or was it wrong that you did it and you said that it's okay for you, but it didn't really reflect your inner truth? What do you think is worse about that? The fact that people ask you to do them favors for them or do something for them, or, you know, ask you to be in a certain way or whatever. The fact that you do it even though you don't want it, or the fact that you actually say it's okay for you when it's not. On a toxicity scale, what do you think is more toxic?
It's kind of like digging a deeper hole. The person could be asking something a little bit unreasonable. You might not want to do it, but if you do it without saying something, or if you just go ahead and do it without saying yes or no nicely, then that's a little bit deeper. But then if you more or less lie to the person, say, yeah, don't worry about it, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
You're deeper down in the hole.
And not only that, you're actually setting it up to repeat, right? Because if you say, yeah, it's okay, no problem, don't worry. I mean, that's literally lying, okay? And now the person thinks, oh, okay. And they ask you again and ask you again. And they, you know, and here you are. This is why this is more toxic than anything else. It's one thing to, you know, do things that you don't really want to do, where you make a compromise, you know. And sometimes, you know, especially when you have children or a business or whatever, you have to do compromises, and we sometimes do things that we don't want to do. That's fine, that's part of life. But if it's in a relationship and it sort of feels imbalanced for you, or like you said, slightly inappropriate, or, you know, it just doesn't feel right, or maybe it just doesn't feel right in that moment. Yeah. And you pretend it is okay. You setting your partner up for failure. I just want to say this for the record here, because obviously there can be so much said about manipulation and exploitation and grooming and mind control, but it's very important that we remember that we have a voice, and in relationships, our voice counts just as much as the other person's voice. And if we're not voicing it, okay, then we automatically carry some of the burden. We already, you know, becoming complicit in it. And that's why, you know, when it comes to like classifying relationships, one of the most common patterns really that occur in toxic relationships is enabling. Yeah, enabling is where you just let it happen. where you don't do anything. You may not be able to fully understand it or define it, or you may not fully get it, but you're also not questioning it, or you're also not setting boundaries. You're also not doing anything to stop it. And that is ultimately then, when you look at the interplay in toxic relationship patterns, how this normally goes. You have one person that is, I guess, sort of more narcissistic, more exploitative, more predatory, or more self-gaining, egotistical. Okay, and the other one who is less of that, and also more afraid of confrontation, more afraid of losing the other person, and therefore also less expressive about their boundaries, more complicit and more enabling. And I really just want to say this for the record, because it's so easy to point fingers and it's so easy to blame things onto the other. But quite frankly, my practice and other counselors and therapists and coaches' practice wouldn't be full, okay, if it wasn't for exactly that. Namely, that we often lack a certain level of self-reflection that allows us to recognize our own part in things. And that's why in sacred self-healing, or in healing altogether, it is extremely important that we go into the self-reflective place, because without that self-reflection, healing is impossible. There's a part of healing and self-healing that requires us to become accountable for our own part. Without it, we stay forever blind, if you will.
Jona, does this play into then what I'm seeing? It was with this enabling, it almost then becomes right now the only word I have is like you're numb then to your own needs, and those are so gone, and then that then leads to this kind of trend of certain relationships that you feel comfortable in, or people that you're attracted to, then suddenly are the ones who are happy to cut you off or tell you you're not acting right into their standards, and suddenly you're in these toxic relationships because of that.
Yeah, so you're already getting this.
Catch
Oh,
it.
oops. Yeah, my video's. So there's a progression. There's a progression, and that progression can continue throughout many different relationships. Okay, so like a pattern, like you call. Okay, so there's obviously patterns that we can develop within a relationship, and then there are patterns that can continue throughout all kinds of relationships. Most of those patterns, most of all the patterns that we have when it comes to connecting with people, they actually play out in all areas of our life and all types of relationships. So they're not limited, they're not unique to a particular relationship. Yeah, because if you think about it, what is relationship really? Relationship is, the art of relating with another, and and experiencing things together. Yeah, and that can really affect everything, also how we relate to our work, how we relate to our children, how we relate to anybody, that we connect with. And so if we have done this a number of times, or for, I'd say, a number of years, and worse even, if we were raised that way, then it's pretty easy to answer your question with yes, 100%, absolutely. Which is why we do these kind of workshops, guys, because you have to do this to the power of your consciousness to break through them. You're innately blind to them. You're not able to see them if you spend all your life in those kind of toxic patterns, especially if you were raised with them. So any kind of, remember the ACEs? Yeah, part one. Yeah, any of these here, yeah, adverse childhood experiences, any of them, and each of them are blinders. Because if you grew up that way, which is also why, there's a lower life expectancy and things like this, all the stuff that I presented to you in our first workshop, where, what the stats say about those adverse, having parents that are addicted to a substance or a behavior, having been exposed to, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, having been inappropriately exposed to violence or to sexual things, having experienced severe loss or separation, having experienced insignificance, yeah, like where to the point where you didn't matter, neglect and abandonment even, yeah, having experienced a lack of care, a lack of like role modeling in regards to to care and self love, and having been exposed to depression or suicide or criminal behaviors, having witnessed certain things that children are just not supposed to witness because they can't process it. And if you see here, I didn't talk about it, I just mentioned it briefly. I added a number 11 to the official list of ACEs, and that is narcissistic parents or family structure. You grew up with invisible toxic family patterns and behaviors. So now add all of these points together, yeah, and imagine each and every one of them being like a blinder, making it almost impossible for you to see things for what they are. It also makes it impossible for you to self-reflect in a way that could be called truthful. Okay, it really impedes self-perception and self-reflection, and also, of course, the reflection of the relationship and the other partner, the realism of things. So narcissism here in context with toxic relationships, I do not want you to see this um, just as a thing that only perpetrators do. Okay, this can happen in various different degrees. Yeah, so very, very important that you understand that. Yeah, various degrees, which means, we all have a certain, can't find it right now, I just want to make it go away. We all have a certain level of narcissism in us. But, in our common lingo, the narcissist is someone who does it deliberately, who does it with some kind of strategy behind it. Is often, most of them are 100% unaware of it. Some of them are fully aware of it. That's more the malignant narcissist. And, they run basically a textbook, yeah, as to how they can, soothe themselves, how they can cope with their inner emptiness or, sort of feelings of like, well, feeling all together. So a certain numbness. And in most people who have a tendency for narcissistic, for high levels of narcissistic behaviors, there is some kind of empathic emptiness in them, yeah, a lack of sense of self, and a really, really deep insecurity, yeah, that needs to be somehow coped with. And the way people who choose to do this in a narcissistic way, basically in an egotistical way, how they do this is by trying to get what they can't get from themselves through others. Yeah, the object, the other person, maybe you, yeah, that can deliver some kind of fulfillment or some kind of narcissistic supply, as we call this, all right, then becomes, sort of becomes the addiction. And addiction is an extremely toxic pattern in any relationship. Not just the addiction to behaviors and substances, but also the addiction to one another, which is what codependency means. And that's why when it's a good, psychologist or therapist, why we say that basically both narcissism and codependency, or even the the counterpart, the narcissistic supply person, yeah, the victim, that they're both operating in the realm of codependency. Both are codependent because both are getting something from it. Without going into the details here, let me ask you one extremely important question. Let's say you are in a relationship with someone who's quite narcissistic, yeah, very egotistical and exploitative, just thinks of their own well-being and so forth. And you stay in it. What is it that you're getting out of this? Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Where the other is a little, not really that sensitive and doesn't really tune into your needs and, is more sort of on the egotistical side of things. Okay. So what's in it for you? Why are you staying?
Well, I know one thing once is approval. That sense of,
Okay. This is a huge one. Explain this a little bit.
oh,
How do you get approval by staying with the narcissist?
well, this one I flashed into more of my youth. So with my parents.
Yeah. We're just, there's no judgment, guys. We're talking about the
It kept going.
dynamics.
Like I eventually, as an adult, noticed finally, oh, Jona, I kept going through a cycle, yeah, of this would happen, and I would try to make things better, and I wanted to help them, more and more and more and more, but always felt really drained from it, and really in the end got more or less punished and disowned, and like the opposite of what one would expect by offering.
It's like a carrot dangle, if at first maybe with positive motivation,
Yeah.
if you like this, then you get all our approval, all our validation, all our love, and a slight undertone perhaps even with if you don't, well then you get disinherited or you get we're punishing you with silent treatment.
Yeah, because I was wondering, well, how come I keep doing the same thing, but the response is worse and worse? It's not as the people. Well, there's some like, what can we do to help? But eventually that was gone too, and it wasn't good. Like I wasn't good enough. It's just what the final thing would come to. So my conclusion was I wasn't good enough. So then looking at it, obviously I was looking for approval.
So I want to say that if you grow up that way, if you can identify that you grew up in a narcissistic family structure or system, then obviously this is the way how you were introduced to love, Janet. Okay, those are your primary caretakers. Okay, so you have been groomed to react that way, namely to trying harder. And most of us who have been groomed that way or have been raised with narcissistic family structure often don't even know any other way of love. We think that's the way it is. That's the way it's supposed to be. That we have to perform in order to get love, in order to get approval. Anybody finds themselves in that belief? In order to get love, in order to, get some kind of validation or approval, I need to perform in a certain way. Yeah. So that is called conditional love. Conditional. It's not unconditional. If that comes from your parents, it's really tricky. This is like trauma quality, okay? Because you have been raised, you have been groomed, you have been like you basically got it into your mother milk, okay? That you have to deserve love. That you have to be in a certain way. And then it really depends on the severity, because, to a degree, we've probably all heard this here and there from our parents. And, most of us are parents ourselves, so we probably also said it, to our kids, that we take something away from them if they're not performing in a certain way. Yeah, but when it's really based on, you showing up for them, you doing what they want you to do, you catering to their needs, and your needs have absolutely no significance, and you had no significance. And if you slip once, if you make a small mistake, the punishment is a total disregard and completely out of proportion. Okay, then that's a trauma right in and of itself. In and of itself. Your whole entire understanding of love and your understanding of self, yeah, your own identity is disturbed when you grow up that way. Now, can all this be healed and retrieved and all that? Absolutely, yes. But first, we have to become aware of it, that our understanding of love is skewed. What would be the opposite of conditional love? What would be unconditional love? Unconditional love is where you know your parents love you, even if you mess up. Yeah, maybe they're strict. That's fine. Strictness is not toxic. On the contrary, can be very healthy because, as children, we need to learn boundaries. So no boundaries, however, can be very toxic because without these boundaries, we are not really able to navigate the world. We need to know at least somewhat, of how this works, and that's what a family structure is for. If the family structure is designed this way that only say one or two people like mother or father are the center of whatever is needed or wanted or controlled, yeah, if it's like geared toward one person or the couple, okay, then the children have no chance of developing a healthy understanding of love and relationship, which is often why we have to go through all these tribulations and all these toxic relationships in order to develop a better sense for that. That's why it's important that we educate ourselves on it, because if your childhood is really the stumbling block, then we're going to spend a little bit more time with the childhood, because you have to recognize how the way you were introduced to love and relationship was toxic in and of itself. And that made it absolutely impossible for you to detect that in your, then relationships later, which in other words, the mate selection is already off. You're unable to feel or to, detect when a relationship is toxic for you, because all you know is toxic. Yeah, so this is really important for self-compassion, that we understand that, and that requires therapy. That requires, working through this bit by bit, because we can regain all that. We can change the way we relate to love and connection, and how we cultivate our relationships is just really normal human skills. But if we were set up with a toxic model for relationships and for bonding and love and attachment, then we have to kind of really recognize that there is a sort of like there's too many blinders there for us to evaluate whether our current relationship or our future relationships, whether they're even healthy for me or not. The realization whether a relationship is healthy or not latest comes when you actually show physical signs. Yeah, when this what I called unsustainable earlier, um, begins to materialize in ways that are no longer tolerable for you physically. The physical is the densest part of our entire body, and so what may just disturb us in an emotional way, or in an intellectual way, or in a spiritual way, or even just in an energetic way at first, once it shows up in our physical, that means that this has been going on for a long time. It's also the reason why people who grow up in narcissistic family systems, yeah, and which is why I would like to count this to the ACEs, come up with a very high degree of physical damage. And sometimes it is that way, that it takes, you know, a few relationships where we had to go through this, and you know, and had to experience the physical, you know, the emotional and the mental and the spiritual and the energetic pain, all the way to the physical pain, to realize that we need to change. We need to change something. And here is a bunch of things that I wanted to go through with you that we have to defer to next time, because we're already at the end of our time. There's YouTube videos on my YouTube channel that where I explain it, where I show these things, and you can prepare that way. I wanted to go back to the audience question from the beginning, and this is really it's a full circle now. You know, how do our relationships, what do they reflect to me, and you know, what do they say about me? With all the things that we've discussed here today, what is your view now? How do you see this now? What would you say? What the quality of your relationships, A, you know, reflects back to you, and B, what it says about you. Who wants to say something? Who wants to express the insight that has come to you here during this discussion today? Your mic is open, but I'm not hearing you.
I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know if this is right, but when I read the question and reflect on what we're talking about, to me, I think maybe the message is that this is an indication of a toxic pattern that just keeps
What exactly
scrolling
is?
through.
Because we talked about all these different things that can indicate to us what is toxic. What is a reflection of toxicity?
I think the negative relationship and then the repeat, so the constant repeat. So what it's
Constant repeat, yes. Constant
what
repeat is
like
definitely part of it. Especially over
so
years. If it's over years, you know, like if it's over weeks or months, okay, this could be like some kind of change in the outer conditions and people going through stuff. Yeah. When people go through things, they may not show up in the best way, and a good relationship can carry that. Yeah. But if it's a continual, whatever the symptom is, can you make an example of a symptom that repeats?
well, I think the the discussion on conditional love and
Hmm.
what my experience is that it isn't love at all. And so the condition is that you have to perform, and there you are, a performing monkey, but it never comes. And
Okay, so
then if you,
the carrot angle, right? And maybe it's something, you know, the you know, like I need to get better, I need to, you know, and this constant questioning yourself if you're good enough, and you're trying harder and harder and doing more and more, and it never comes back. Yeah, that's a toxic pattern. Okay,
and if
but
you
what
don't
does it?
resolve it, then you just keep getting into new relationships that have exactly the same thing.
Right. So the repetitiveness of patterns, especially if they're painful, if they're hurtful, yeah, that is a big part of how toxicity is defined. The question is, and this is really the key question for all of us, without going into detail here. If we detect this as any of these toxic patterns that we talked about today, as a recurring, yeah, occurrence for us, whether it be in one relationship or in multiple relationships, is irrelevant, because things repeat for as long as they need to repeat until we change something. Yet they won't stop by itself. But the key question is not why. The key question is, why are we staying? What do we get out of this? Let's say we identify that we've been raised with an idea or with an understanding of conditionality with love. And, you know, let's say we had narcissistic parents or whatever. And yeah, so we admit, okay, this wasn't the best start, right, that we had. Okay. And let's say we ended up in a bunch of relationships that were that way. I did. Okay. And let's say, you know, we find ourselves in a relationship still where it is the case. Why are we staying? Janet made the point that, yeah, there's a form of approval, but it's more like the approval seeking, really. It's not, we're not never getting approval. We're never getting what we want. Why do we allow it to repeat, to continue? Why?
Because it's my job to be a good girl and not to rock the boat and don't let the neighbors know and don't air your dirty laundry.
Who says so?
Would be mom.
Okay, but you just said that. You just said that
Here's,
this is the reason why you're
it's in my
doing it.
brain.
Okay. So there is a thought or a mindset, yeah, a belief in your brain, and you can identify that it probably comes somewhere from what was modeled to you, okay, that makes you continue engaging in that. Okay, is that your opinion? Is that your belief, Linda?
You know, it's really hard. I'm going to have to sit with that because I'm old. What's been going on in my head for a long time, and so I think I have bought into a lot of that.
It's not. It's not. I mean, you know, I just told you guys, if you were raised that way, you have no other option but buying into it because you don't know any different. But now I'm asking you, right now, here, okay, is this your belief? Do you believe that truly in your heart, or do you think that it's toxic?
Well, certainly my brain, my head brain tells me absolutely not, that that's ridiculous. But I've got to believe that I've got some pretty strong beliefs in there that are keeping me stuck.
Okay, but those are not your beliefs, right? So
Yeah.
start saying, this is not my belief. This is a belief that is stuck in me, yes, and it puts blinders on me, but it's not my belief. It's some kind of
Yeah.
other beliefs. Start
Yeah.
separating. Stop identifying with those beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, see
Yeah.
it as an implant or whatever. You know, I mean, because that's kind of like what it is.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
uncovering it is so
Yes.
wonderful.
And it's important that we do that and that we are very particular and very anal about that. You know, like, no, no, yes, this belief is running a lot of my choices still to this day. But if I really feel into it, it's not my belief. That's not truly what I believe how relationships should be. I've just, you know, sort of, I don't know, ingested it or osmotically learned it or, you know, perhaps
When
never
you
even
actually
questioned it.
when you start peeling the onion, it's very deep because you know
Hmm.
you just even right on the surface is you peel off the first level and it says, well, you're broken, you're not worthy, you
Right.
don't have value, and you know
It's part
it's
of
the
the,
whole Bible.
I know, and that's the part that keeps you stuck. It's just the first layer. There is so many more layers to that because that's part of the program. That's why the program still runs. Why? Because you don't want to feel that way. You don't want to feel like a bad girl, right? Now you go a level deeper and ask yourself, well, what's the fear underneath that? What's the belief underneath that? That if I don't sacrifice myself, I am a bad girl. And if I'm a bad girl, then what? What happens if you're a bad girl?
Then you're not worthy, and then if you're not worthy, well, you're not lovable, and
Okay. And then what happens? But if you're not lovable, then what happens?
well, then you just accept what you get.
Okay. And when you accept what you get, when that's basically, you know, like sort of the scraps, right? That's what you're referring to, right?
The
You just
junkyard, yeah.
yeah, you accept sort of little bit substandard, if you will.
Yeah.
Substandard meaning, you know, not getting your own needs and wants fulfilled. Okay, so if that happens, you know, what happens then? If you accept substandard, if you agree to the scraps,
It's just miserable.
okay. And now look at maybe your relationship or a past relationship that you were in where that was the case. You're afraid of something that already is.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked, what keeps you there?
That is such a good question.
It's all your worst fears have already come true.
Yeah.
You already feel that way.
It's already happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing you need to realize is that you no longer need to be afraid of it because it's already there. Okay.
Yeah.
So us talking about it doesn't make it more or less real. You're still going to go back into it, you know? So we're just uncovering it. We're making you just becoming aware of it. That that's actually what you're doing. Okay. So now, obviously, the next question, that's the harder one. Is that sustainable? Am I perhaps even complicit in a way? Am I
Yeah.
enabling it?
Yes. Silence is enabling.
Yeah. So what's that going to do to me? On top of already feeling like a doormat and just getting the scraps and agreeing to something substandard. Realizing that you're enabling it in some ways and that you're partially responsible for it to continue, for it continuing.
Yeah. Just one more thing to beat yourself with.
I know, right? It pulls you into guilt.
Sure.
Because you know, the moment where you realize that your own behavior is enabling and complicit, okay, now you also have to carry the load.
Yeah.
That's already going on in us. That always goes on in us when we do something that we don't really want to do. Just so you guys know, this is the biggest issue. This is the mind fuck that we get put into, the fucking ourselves. Okay, and we feel so ashamed and so guilty that it immobilizes us, and that's the reason why we don't do anything about it. We get stuck in the first layer of the onion, you know, like, oh, if I just try a little better, if I just do more, if I just try harder, if I just control a little more, maybe then one day I get a crumb of the cake. You know what the hardest part is for us to admit, and this is why I talked so much about fantasy in the beginning, is that there may not be a cake. Anybody any idea why this is so hard to admit to ourselves? That maybe this person that I want to be loved by, that I want to feel love from, isn't capable of loving. Isn't even that big bag of chips. Doesn't even have anything to give. Do you know why this is hard to admit to ourselves? Anybody any ideas? Why do we not want to admit that to ourselves?
Is it because the current relationship is just a repeat of a deeper relationship from further back that we're really trying to resolve?
No, no. Uh-uh. No, this is the psychological view, and it's way too superficial because, you know, this is not the point. We're in the here, in the now. You're making choices right now. This is self-reflection. You're reflecting on what you're doing right now. Okay, why do we not want to admit to ourselves that what we're hoping for, yeah, the carrot, that the carrot is actually some piece of toxic root, and not a carrot at all.
Hi, Jona.
Hi, Molly.
I've been listening away because I missed a couple. I was here in the first one, but I've just been reflecting about what you've been saying, and that it sort of takes a lot of the judgment out when you look at how you were brought up, and it's like, well, they didn't know any better, and I didn't know any better, and then you realise it's more about a relationship with yourself, isn't it? And to me, it's like I've actually got to do this for myself. Like I can't expect.
Yeah, I mean, that's the backdrop. That's
Without
really the
being
backdrop.
judgmental of me or other people, it's like, oh, so I have to be the carrot. I don't know.
Yes. Well, it's okay to not fully believe yet that you can be a carrot, but
Yeah, for yourself.
we're just talking about like how good is our judgment about other people being carrots.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
Maybe that is not a carrot. Maybe he doesn't really have that much to give. Maybe I'm trying the right thing with the wrong person.
Yeah, right. And not just romantic. I mean, I've been listening to this going through friendships and family. It's just across the board, isn't it?
Does. Yeah, it does. It weaves through everything. Because
And
there's
I
a
have
point.
I have to accept I wouldn't have enabled that if I had more warmth within me. They're just a reflection of me, and I'm reflecting them.
Okay, so you're bringing in a different aspect here, how to actually do it. We're still at the point why is it so hard to admit to us that we're in a toxic relationship? Okay, well, then the next level, the healing part is like, okay, how can we turn this around? But right now, and this is a key question for anybody who is in a toxic relationship, has been in a toxic relationship, or grew up in a toxic relationship. Why do we hang on for so long? Why is it so hard for us to admit it to ourselves that the relationship is shit? Just to, simplify things a little bit here.
Well, for me, in any of them, it's been just fear, like too scared to break away and do it for myself. Just.
If you stay in a toxic relationship for like 3 months or something, and it takes you a while to figure this out, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, okay, that's how long it normally takes, 2 to 3 years, to gain clarity about the partner's, capabilities and potential. Yeah, after 2, 3 years, you kind of know what you're getting. But why is that so hard sometimes? And it's a specific type of person that has that difficulty. It's a lot of people who have that difficulty, but why is it? What in us does not want us to admit that? It's not fear.
Is it because you've invested so much energy in it, and then you've got to accept that was well, it wasn't a waste of energy. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, is that it? It's like and then you don't want to let go of it because you've spent so much.
You are hanging on to it. Yes. It's the
Right.
fantasy of how you want it to be, or how it could have been, or how it maybe was one day. Yes.
Okay.
The payoff that we are getting from this is that we are producing a carrot where there is none. And we don't want to admit it to ourselves, because then we would have to admit to ourselves that it was bad all along.
Yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, that it was a waste. It is our own. We don't. As soon as our ego begins to invest, guys, remember this. We're going to go through some pretty hefty stuff here next time. And we go into detail. Okay. As soon as our ego starts to invest with projections and, he's just doing this because, and yeah, that's just because of how I grew up. When we like brush these things away and violate our own integrity, we're in it. We're in it and we're off it. And we become a player. this is the hardest part. This is why people stay in toxic relationships primarily. There are situations, obviously, when you have physical violence and so forth in play, where there's an actual physical scare, and sometimes money can also be the reason why people stay in toxic relationships, because they're afraid that they couldn't make it on their own. Yeah, but in those cases, you're not an illusion about it. You know that your partner is, you know what they are. You're not an illusion about the relationship. The only thing that can happen if you were raised in a family system where that was sort of normal is that you have this like still childlike fantasy that one day he's going to wake up and he's going to realize what he has in me, and he's going to come to his senses, and he's going to confess his everlasting love to me, and he's going to change overnight.
Yes, I've done that one.
Guys, don't feel judged here. Okay, the reason why I can do this
pretty
is
good.
because I've been there. Okay, I know exactly what was going on inside of me.
But Jona, what about the one that, like, I think that my position would be there is nothing else, and this is all there is, and therefore, cook
Yeah,
the
but you
dinner
settle.
and
Okay.
settle
Yeah.
it, maybe.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem because if you really believe that, okay, and that's your reasoning, yeah, for settling for less. Okay, so that's your choice then. That's literally your choice.
Yep, gotta think
This
on
is
that, and think it's my
it's a
choice.
yeah, it's a very common fear. It's very common, especially, when you get older and you think, oh, I'm never ever going to find. It's bullshit. Because if you are in a toxic relationship, like we've defined this in the beginning very clearly, which is unsustainable and unhealthy on all levels, okay, and you stay because you think there's nothing better out there, you got a problem. If you think that, slowly dying with your relationship, yeah, because it's poisoning you, is all there is, then there's a huge blinder there, because your own self-preservation should tell you that you're better off without the relationship, no matter what. That's self-preservation. We're not even talking self-love. We're just talking self-preservation. What would you recommend to someone who eats a deadly, poisonous root every day? Okay.
That's
And the person
interesting.
says,
Oh.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, this self-preservation thing is actually quite key too, because this I noticed with myself. Years ago, I was like, do I not care about my life? I mean, because I was I was observing things, and that self-preservation can be diminished hugely, and it kind of leaves the little will there to keep you alive. Because I noticed that with myself, not severely, but definitely had times where I wondered, do I care what happens to my life or not?
Yeah, so that's then the ultimate realization,
To varying
that
degrees.
yes, this is the choice, the choice that we then have to come to, that I care about my life more than, my fear or the fantasy. It's either or combination of both a lot of times. But if something is established to be toxic, okay, that means it's going to kill you in some way. It's either going to kill your heart, or it's going to kill, your emotions. It's going to kill your sanity. It's going to kill your energy, or your body, or all of the above. And you keep doing it. You're expressing something there to the universe, to God, and that is that you don't care. So self-preservation also has a spiritual component, because you're like literally reinforcing that you don't care about life. And that's unfortunately what those toxic relationships can do to us. They can literally drive us into, like, maybe not necessarily suicidal ideation, but a point where we become lifeless, where we no longer care about life. And if we have some kind of spiritual understanding of what life is and how sacred it is, then sometimes the spiritual aspect is the one that can save us, that can bring us to our senses. Because if that's how we treat life, our own life, that's the same with drugs or, other, any kind of toxins. For as long as we're not aware of it is one thing, and this is unfortunately the problem with when we grow up in toxic relationship settings, like family systems, we don't realize how toxic it is. But latest, when we feel how it's slowly killing our life force, yeah, and that's why spirituality can help us with that, because it can allow us to feel that more. It's painful to look this into the eyes, to really look at that. But that's what we're doing. We're going against life. It's not life promoting what we're doing, no matter what we're telling ourselves. So that's why, in most, the therapeutic environments and recovery and, healing environments, you need to add the spiritual component to that, because it allows you to understand the deeper meaning of what it is that you're doing or not doing, without like a religious agenda. That's a whole different component here. And if somebody has a religious programming and the religious mindsets, okay, then that can also, play into that. It can make it worse, or it can make it easier to get out of toxic things. Now, depending on the religion and on the, whatever the dogma is. Yeah, there's plenty of societies and religions where it's totally okay for a woman to be self-sacrificial to the point that she dies. All we really need to ask ourselves, whether it's religious or not, whether it's the family system that we were born into or not, if that is what we believe, if that is really what we subscribe to, what we align ourselves to or not, because that is our choice. And whatever it is that we run into in form of resistances that come up in us, like, oh, what would the neighbors think? Oh, after all these years, I've maybe told my family how great it is. I wasn't really honest with myself, or, what am I going to do financially? There's no security, blah, blah. Those are all things that we are telling ourselves, that we are aligning ourselves to. So if we tell ourselves that we stay in a toxic relationship because of money, then that is our choice. If we stay in a toxic relationship because, our faith tells us that, or, our neighbors tell us that, or whatever, then that is our choice. That is our choice and our responsibility as well. So the healing process cannot begin until we are aware of that. There is no solution for toxicity, guys. That is the hard part. When something is not life promoting and something is toxic, no matter how you twist or turn it, it's going to kill a part of you, if not all of it, because it goes against life. That's what toxicity is on a long enough timeline. Some things are so poisonous, you stay with a person for 3 months and you're almost, completely drained. Yeah, and some relationships, they take 30 years to unfold their full toxicity. Okay, but it doesn't matter. As soon as that awareness kicks in, that it's fundamentally against yourself, what you're doing, okay, you're in trouble. And healing can only set in once you've admitted that to yourself. Because then you can actually investigate, what are these beliefs? What are these payoffs? What is my own interest in this? What is that choice that I'm making over and over again without being aware of it? Yes, and in that, this question is the core question. How do our relationships reflect ourselves? Or how do the quality of our relationships reflect our relationship with ourselves? Well, right there is the answer. If you are agreeing to a toxic relationship on the outside, then that means that you're aligning yourself or agreeing to a toxic relationship with yourself. So yes, some of the things that we can do about this, and there's a lot of stuff that we can do to heal that, is to become the carrot, which is a little bit tricky. Yeah, that's why this is such a big topic in therapy. It takes a while because you have to kind of untrain yourself from all those toxic thought patterns and beliefs that you have maybe carried around with you since your childhood. But it's not about healing your childhood, it's not about healing past relationships. It's about healing your relationship with yourself right now. Because that's where choices are being made. They're being made right now. And then maybe if you feel the need to, you can, process your past relationships, or you can go into like some of the parental inner child stuff, because there's other layers, other things that are linked to that in other areas of your life. But staying in a toxic relationship reflects that you have a toxic relationship with yourself. Okay, guys, deep stuff here. Yeah. So we're going to have to add one more part to this because we haven't even gotten to how it all happens. So next time, we're going to go a little deeper into how we are how it comes that we are so blind. Yeah. How all this happens. And it's very healing to see it, black on white, like, oh, shoot, it's textbook, guys. And there are people out there that know that do it on purpose. But majority of people don't do it on purpose. They're just, like you, raised in a certain way that they think it's okay. Or, they do it for as long as they can get away with it. And once more, it's up to you whether you choose to stay in it or not. In my experience as an energy coach, it's a simple realization, and that is that there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with my values. And there's not even anything wrong with, being willing to give and being, I don't want to use the word sacrificial, but, like really being willing to give everything we have. There's nothing wrong with that. But your job is to pick the right person to do this with. And if you try to do this with the wrong person, remember to talk about the values. If you keep trying to align yourself to people who have different values, then you're screwed. You're in trouble. Because that means that you're giving up a part of your own soul in that moment. Well, thank you so much for sharing, for tagging along, for, really diving into the deeper end of, what can go wrong in relationships. We're going to have, part 5 in which we're going to investigate all these tactics and mechanisms, how that actually occurs, that we have these implanted thoughts that we're not even thinking or believing in ourselves, just so that it becomes a little easier for us to not be judgmental, to not judge ourselves, to not beat ourselves up or bash ourselves for not having seen this earlier, or not being able to figure this out ourselves. Let me say this one more time. If you were raised in a toxic family system, with a narcissistic elements present. If your first relationships were with people that are exploitative, predatory, or narcissistic, you cannot know better. You cannot know better. The only way for you to get past this is to learn what these mechanisms are, and then to really, work with them and make sure that you do not repeat. Yeah. And there's a certain level of self-forgiveness that is needed. You have to forgive yourself for what you couldn't know before. It's all about the now, guys. It's not about the past. The past leads us to certain places in our journey, and those are typically, especially the uncomfortable ones, are the places where we can grow and where we can heal. Yeah.
Jona, thank you so much for sharing with us and your wisdom. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you so much for coming and for your courage to even listen to it, because this goes beyond, like mainstream media and, relationship 101. Okay. But it is, the part that heals us. When you hit that point where you realize that there's things that you can't see or that you don't want to admit to yourself, that's when you are right at the starting point of growing and healing. Okay. And with this, I want to close. Stay conscious, guys. Thank you for listening. Keep the questions coming. Your questions are phenomenal. Put them in the description here from in the video comments, or send them to me either via the invitation link. There's always a button that says, if you have any questions, send them here or text them to me. Yeah, your questions are really, really valuable, because they show your reflection, and that's why we want to continue this. This is what self-healing is. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.